All right. Hello and welcome to Thoughts on Talks with the nicely posed Reverend Mike McMorrow, miming the activity of talking, and myself, Malayna Dawn. And here in this arena, we will be picking apart Reverend Mike's Sunday talk, yesterday's, like that. Yesterday's, which was Sunday, July 12th. That looks gross. Like you're picking, like, you know, the apes that groom each other by picking little bugs out of their fur. Is that what you were going for there?
Picking bits of talk.
There you go. Thoughts from talks.
Yes.
So yesterday's talk, the topic was the theme for July's Unchained Spirituality, and the talk topic, none are free until all are free. In fact, I'll share the screen because that's a nice graphic. And maybe I'll make it full screen. Well, that's good enough for now. We have to treat and move our feet.
Yeah.
This is true. That we are actually we are the hands and feet of God.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if we believe that God is everywhere present, right?
Yes, and that we are expressions of that divinity, then it becomes ours to do.
Correct.
Ours collectively as spiritual beings having human experiences.
Yes.
And then each of us individually has to find what that expression, what that action is for us.
We have to clean up our own messes.
Yes, and sometimes that means cleaning up the messes that we've inherited, which we are certainly finding is the case in our society these days. So there was one photograph that I want to ask you about that was up in the background. Let me see if I can get it to show. Okay, I enabled editing and it all went away.
Was it the fisherman?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So from where I was, I couldn't tell if that was somebody that we were supposed to know who it is.
No, they're just a couple of Irishmen fishing, having a conversation, right? Having a conversation that they can't get out of because there's just the two of them on the boat.
Well, one could jump off and swim away, but
the water's really cold there.
It does, it doesn't look like a delightful swimming day.
No.
Okay.
So that was the idea.
Okay.
Behind that, because in that portion, I believe we were speaking. I was speaking to having conversations and developing the skills to have conversations around difficult subjects.
Yes.
You know, and how that's getting to be more important now than ever.
Yeah, because it seems like people are having a harder time even staying connected with people who disagree with them. So,
well, especially that, you know, it's even when I was in high school, you know, at one time when you went to school, you learned rhetoric and debate.
Mm-hmm.
And those are skills that we don't have anymore. And at least at the secondary school level.
Right.
And so maybe that's a college prep thing. I don't know. But certainly lawyers are trained to speak to either side of a particular argument.
Right.
And we've kind of, you know, as much as I go looking for, particularly in the political arena, I go looking for viewpoints that are different than my own.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to find ways to find common ground.
Right.
And because whether we're talking about systemic racism or climate change or healthcare or making sure people have enough to eat or even reproductive rights, right? So that's just in our little country here.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be able to have conversations and to find ways that we can compromise so that we can go forward.
Yeah.
So it's not helping us. This is why I made the point of the deep state, which is, been part of this narrative the last 3 or 4 years. And it's showing up again, at least in social media.
The deep state?
The deep state. You haven't heard of this?
I don't think so.
So in other words, the deep state is the apparatus of government that's working against this current administration, right?
Okay.
So, and the people that, the quote unquote snitches and so forth. I don't know exactly. So, Linda Tripp, back in the Clinton years,
Mm-hmm.
well, was she part of the deep state? Right? She's the one who started, who was the confidant of Monica Lewinsky,
Mm-hmm.
right? And who was, of course, a Republican and an anti-Clintonite.
Wow.
So, but there's another word for it. It's called bureaucracy, and it is kind of one of the gifts of this particular system that we have, in that the country can keep going in spite of who's at the head of the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And all successful organizations need to be able to do that, particularly if they're publicly traded,
Mm-hmm.
but even a church community, right? So church communities that fail often fail when they have a very charismatic minister
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't have a shared leadership.
Right.
And the church thrives because the minister is, an amazing speaker, maybe even a good people person and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But then they retire or they move on or they get recruited away, whatever happens.
Right.
And the community doesn't know how to do anything.
Right.
Right? Because no one's been trained, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like right now, if something were to happen to me or Reverend Nancy, it would be really weird for people to try and come back and do church, not because we don't have lots of people who know how to do stuff. It's just nobody's been doing it for 3 months.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So that will be one of the interesting challenges when we come back, from volunteers to practitioners, so forth. So, because there's going to be a lot to do.
Yeah.
Back because we have all kinds of new jobs. So hopefully people have had a long enough layoff that you will be able to replenish, maybe give the folks who are really, doing the heavy lifting. I'm speaking to our spiritual community right now.
Right.
Who have been doing the heavy lifting for the last, let's say, 5 years. Because, it does tend to be kind of the same people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. But ideally, as a person who's, from my perspective and from a pastorship model and from a shared leadership model, I would love to find little pieces where, 50 people have some small commitment that they can contribute. right? So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I mean,
I don't like off into that, but except that apparatus, right? It's necessary at any organizational level.
right. And that's the same whether you're in a small village or in a larger community, and as part of a country, there are all these hierarchies of groups of people, and we need to work together because we're like those fishermen in the boat. This planet is our little lifeboat, and we're all sharing the planet, and so we can't continue to put our heads in the sand and pretend that we're in a little bubble of our own making.
So it takes work to break through that. So I just use that because I had been reading a lot about deep state stuff, particularly with you can't really talk about this current administration without speaking to Bannon and some of the internet sites that were involved in, particularly when speaking to white supremacy. And so Breitbart is kind of a far right site, for instance. And so that's where this deep state conspiracy comes from. Okay. I thought it was a great metaphor for us as religious scientists or even secular people, right? I mean, if you think on it and you go looking for the evidence, it's the most deeply subjectified stuff is how we demonstrate our life. And so the deep state is our deep state of consciousness, or our consciousness at the deepest levels.
Right.
And that is where the action, and sometimes we can fake it till we make it. I didn't really speak to that yesterday, but that's a legitimate action step.
So is that the level at which our trauma would then be? It's like a subscript running in our programming that's where the healing has to happen, that we have to identify our wounds that we're reacting from to protect ourselves from something. And sometimes we're not even conscious what that is, because that's when it makes interaction difficult with somebody who doesn't agree with us, because it pokes all of our wounds and makes us put up all of our defenses and
that's right.
Just give up. So the healing of trauma is sort of where we're at, just to be able to communicate with each other.
Right, and insecurity is kind of its own little trauma. And so where does that insecurity come from? Well, we're afraid of something. Well, what are we afraid of? Well, it might be that we had sloppy parenting, where we got the strap instead of an explanation. Right? So punishment is an effective way to train people in the short term.
Right.
It can be done quickly and you move on.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work. Let's just take parenting, right? It takes a lot of work to work with a child to set limits and to allow them, give them enough head to where they're trying to make their way in the world, but at the same time, set limits. So for instance, let's say, and I noticed this myself several years ago, that it's far easier to pay a gardener $75 a month to come in and just take care of the yard than it is to get on our teenager to go out and cut the grass and to sweep it up and to edge it and to do a proper job.
Right.
And instead it just turns into this whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So these guys, the quote unquote blow and go guys can show up and do it in an hour, and it takes a teenager 4 hours. And, and riding them and listening
Right.
to the whining and the complaining and the blah, 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 blah. So it just, versus, give them a smack upside the head, say, look, you get out there or I'm going to put the map of Ireland on your backside. Right?
Never heard that one.
That was my dad. So
no one's ever
that's another way to do it.
Map of Ireland.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You don't want the map of Ireland.
Apparently not.
No, it's more than one lick.
Okay.
But you get my point. I mean,
Yeah.
I think everybody has this experience.
Right.
So it's the messiness of human interaction.
Yes.
That where people can be traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said yesterday, so I was kind of thinking that in a peaceful society, trauma may not be as easy to spot.
Right.
Versus someone who's grown up in a war zone. Like, if you're living in Lebanon or in Syria right now, or even Israel, right? There are all kinds of opportunities to experience significant trauma, both to your physical body and emotionally.
Yeah.
But raging at someone can traumatize somebody. You do that enough times, and then they don't feel safe in the world.
Right.
And then when they don't feel safe in the world, then they armor up.
Right.
Their defenses are always up. And so it makes it difficult to have, you can have conversations, but only so far.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
you need to
psychologically we're not prepared to handle it.
Right. You need to feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to be honest, and to really listen to somebody else, especially when they don't agree with you. And it's hard for us to let ourselves be vulnerable. It's scary. It's
right.
So
I'll give you another example before we get to Resmaa. Okay, so there's the the whatever that if someone grows up or is exposed to a yeller, right? And so, and then in their adult life, they can't handle confrontation when people start yelling. And they can be brilliant, they can be funny away from the job, they can be, all these things. And yet, because they can't deal with that kind of personality, right, they become kind of a shrinking violet. They might even, because that feels normal then, right, they might even pick someone like that as a life partner. Right. Right. And which has its own demonstrations for, not being as effective as they might be, say, as a couple.
Right. And opportunities for healing, because that's also the subtext of a wound, is that we're always seeking healing, whether it's subconscious or conscious.
That's
right. Usually subconscious. And so we put ourselves repeatedly in situations that will give us that opportunity to heal. And it's a complex combination of what feels normal, what we expect consciously from life, and part of us trying to heal. So,
well, and what that does is it implants triggers within us.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where it really gets tricky and makes it difficult for us to. It can make it difficult for us in our relationships, and let's face it, all of life is relationships.
Yeah.
Right? Unless you're a web designer working away in your in your little cubby hole at your desk in your home right now.
But if you're designing,
you have
clients.
yeah, you have your client, and then you have to be able to, you know, pull at the vision that the client has, or maybe has no idea of, probably most of the time. You know, you got to pull out, you know, graphically what it, you know, all of these things,
Yeah.
which is actually kind of a great metaphor for when we're trying to do really difficult things. So, for instance, with Resmaa Menakem's book,
Mm-hmm.
Your Grandmother's Hands, he speaks to trauma on an even deeper level, which is within our DNA, that
Right.
we're pre-wired with these triggers.
Right.
And he goes through it pretty methodically, and there's good science to back it up. It's not just a hypothesis that he's putting out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the way that we're triggered then has a biologic response of fight, flight, freeze, or submit.
Right.
And that, so white bodies have within them, encoded within them, centuries upon centuries of trauma coming from Europe, where they basically spent, you know, 2,000 years warring on each other.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That was just kind of the way of it. And of course, and we all have some of that, you know. So even in Africa, there were warring tribes, stuff. In North America, before Europeans showed up, right? The Iroquois and the Huron and some of these, you know, they had wars as well. So there's all this trauma that's encoded in us along with those triggers. And this is what has, so what Resmaa is saying is, you know, white folks can't handle the possibility that they may be racist in either most are not racist in explicit ways, but rather in complicit ways. And that's the part that's really hard.
Yeah.
Right? For both, and it doesn't matter. A liberal or a conservative does not want to hear that shit. And so what I appreciate what Resmaa is saying is that, well, the reason why you can't handle it is because it's encoded in you to not want to look at it.
Yeah.
So it becomes even more important then to be able to do the work. And here's some tools.
Right.
Right. So
yeah, all the tools are really about reconnecting to our bodies and feeling and noticing what comes up and where we feel it in our bodies when we're faced with these uncomfortable conversations, situations, even thoughts, because a lot of them are experiential, but you can do it as a thought experiment where, like one of them where you draw a boundary, a circle boundary around you, and you imagine different people coming toward you into the circle. So the first one is someone you love, and what is the feeling you get, and do you feel like walking toward them, or do you feel like embracing them? The second one is somebody that you're having some kind of conflict with, and you know, what's your body position, what are the feelings that come up there? And then somebody that you really don't feel safe with, and how do you feel when they enter that circle? And those are things that for most of us, most, you know, white, light-skinned people who can kind of pass for mainstream society without too much second look or identification physically, we don't feel those microaggressions coming at us, or any of the things that people of color deal with when they're identified on site as being different from the mainstream. And so we don't have to face those things. So when we're put in a place where we're imagining it, and then we can put ourselves in the place of somebody who has to deal with that every day, it's an eye-opener.
Right. So so there's some great potential in here, right? So if we can learn how to use tools to address, because he speaks to when white bodies feel safe with blue bodies, which is what he calls police,
Right.
but threatened by black bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Black bodies, when it comes to the police, are both scared and not grateful, but there's a recognition that they need them.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that black bodies, of course, are kind of feeling threats all the way around because of what he calls Resmaa calls white body supremacy, which is kind of a loaded word. I think maybe it might be helpful to say where Europeans have been the cultural majority.
Right. Or maybe the defaults.
Yeah.
The main group default, because supremacy almost has that reactive state for us, that word.
And that's true. And then on the other hand, do we really want to give each other a pass anymore? Because the fact is that it was European men who instituted slavery. In fact, went out of their way to institute slavery for Africans. And they were sail ships then, right?
Yeah.
So you had to go out of your way to get Africans here to start with.
Yeah.
And then you had to keep them here. And then when they got, when they were forcibly freed against your will.
Yeah, and the thing that you have, the psyche that one would have to have.
Well, right, because there was no abolitionist act of contrition.
No.
Following the Civil War, there was just resentment. And then that resentment, of course, led to Jim Crow.
I'm even going back to like the kind of traveler that goes to another country and meets people who have different culture and says, I'm gathering you all up whether you like it or not, and you're all coming on this ship with me and you're mine now. That's one type of psyche. And then to see all of the hardships that they went through on these ships, they weren't treated like people. They weren't guests. They were treated like cattle, like property. And if somebody got sick, then they probably died and they would be thrown overboard. And then...
And slavery has been part of the human condition.
Yes.
Greeks, Romans.
It's part of the
Irish, the Celts, the Irish, the Germanic peoples, the Vikings, all had slaves.
And it was usually the conquered people, right? Like you would go to war and you would conquer those people, and then you'd say, okay, we won, you're going to do all our work for us now.
But in this case, of course, given that these conquered people had dark skin, it just made it easier to keep track of everyone. So it's just really kind of hideous in its design.
Yeah.
And in the particular way in which it was implemented in the colonies, which eventually became the United States. And then, and just, everybody in the modern era, we talk about kicking the can down the road. If tax reform and budgets and all, and deficits and all the stuff that we have kicked the can down the road on, then slavery is like, kicking the, battleship, down the road. I mean, it's just, we just have not, we were almost there and then we've retreated from it. So we have this unique opportunity And a unique opportunity as religious scientists also to look at it, because as we identify our own resistance to having conversations, first conversations, and then a willingness to create new policy and to codify new ways of being societally and culturally, you're not going to really make things right, but you can certainly work at leveling the playing field, right? You can certainly work at, where, and Resmaa speaks to this also, that fear that he has every time his son gets in the car and leaves the house, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's real stuff.
It's real.
And, and it took a long time it's been with us a long time, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it has to happen. And I think that's what we're seeing with our young people right now, no more. And
right.
So with our explorations with Salam, I'm hoping that, we can get to that part of the conversation to find, okay, because, it's not up to Salam and people of color to tell us what to do.
Right.
It's up to us to identify them, because they already have enough to do.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like we're just giving them another job.
Right.
So, yeah. And so if we find the ways that we are not expressing our best life in this situation, we're a religious scientist who believes in the power of thought and that we are accessing a field of infinite intelligence that's hampered only by our misuse of it in ways known and unknown.
Yeah.
Right? So that healing that trauma, right, and the insights that go with that healing are going to heal other, will reverberate and heal other aspects of our life as well, in ways that we are not even aware of right now.
Yeah.
Because things will be so different because of because we're making this idea of e pluribus unum a reality.
Yes.
Right? So recognizing our multiplicity, like Tracy Brown talked about, multiplicity of the beautiful flowers in the field, and that there's one field.
Yes.
And that's what it takes to make a garden.
And I think I mentioned this video that I saw in one of our past episodes where they have people from different cultures just sit and look into each other's eyes for 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Sometimes they used like sign language or, charades to communicate with each other, but they weren't supposed to speak to each other. And one of the exercises that Resmaa mentions in the book, My Grandmother's Hands, was being confronted with somebody and looking into their eyes in a pleading way, like saying, please see me and connect with me, and having them just not acknowledge you. And I think that's a really basic place that we all can start, is by acknowledging that we are all connected, that having compassion. I got into a Facebook fight a few weeks ago with somebody who I had mentioned. We were talking about masks on one of my friend's posts. And I said, it's a real thing. I have a friend who had COVID and recovered, and I know of one person who has passed away. And the person's response was, only 0.02 people die from it. And I said, I'm pretty sure the family of the person who passed doesn't care what percentage it was. And that was my attempt to get some feeling, some humanity from this person who was throwing statistics at me. And she came back with more, and it sounded like sound bites that she had just taken and accepted and was just throwing back. And so I finally got really sarcastic, because that was my way to say words that were not mean fighting words, but hopefully got the point across. It's, you know, maybe not being fully authentic, but I said, thank you for your repeated expressions of compassion. This is mean. It's hearts like yours that are going to help our country move forward, or something to that effect. I felt, you know, a little like superior and a little bad doing it. And ultimately, my friend who had made the initial post, which was really about the show America's Got Talent, it really had nothing to, it was like, why aren't they wearing masks? And it devolved into this political discussion. She just took the post down, and on the side apologized to me that her one friend was nasty and was, you know, not listening. And I said, I'm sorry for poking a bear on your Facebook page. But it was partly in an attempt to communicate, like, these aren't statistics. These are people I know. And why aren't you responding with compassion? And why doesn't that shake you out of your, you know, sound bites that you've been fed? And another video I saw, and I think I mentioned this, was a group of Black Lives Matter protesters showed up at a Make America Great Again rally. It was I don't know if it was necessarily Trump specifically, but it was that kind of group. And they expected to just stand there. They had chains on their wrists and were just standing with their arms up. And the organizers of the rally invited the group to come on stage and speak, and said, this is America. We don't have to agree, but everybody deserves a right to be heard. And from the crowd, the people were yelling these sound bites. What about black on black crime? What was the other one? I can't remember what the other one was, but they're things I've just heard repeated over and over again that people are grabbing onto as if that's the answer and they don't have to look any further.
Right.
But ultimately, after the leader of the Black Lives Matter group got up on stage and spoke, there were people cheering, because he was talking about, you know, freedom and rights and America. And afterward, people came up to him and had conversations. And it was people that you wouldn't expect to have conversations with him, and he didn't expect it.
Right.
But those are the kind of, they had to risk, as a small group of maybe 8 people, and be vulnerable, have the courage to even go to that rally and stand there, and then take the opportunity when invited, risk, you know, they could have been shot. They were up on a stage in a, you know, angry crowd. You never know what's going to happen in a crowd. But
well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm also struck by that story about how this person was prepared for the moment. So often what happens in these kinds of conversations is that they're just emotional. This gets back to the body supremacy idea, that it's just emotion.
Yeah.
You know, usually from anger or fear. And of course, anger is often rooted in a fear of some kind.
Right.
But to be able, for this person who spoke up, to be able to articulate, right? So to actually reason, like not just, you know, I'm black and I'm tired of being kicked around.
Right.
Right. But let me let me learn what is it about my experience, and how does that tie with my ancestors, and how does that equate to, you know, the experience of Black people post 19, you know, since Dr. King, for instance.
Right.
So, because aren't we all done? Right? Didn't we have our kumbaya moment, and didn't we have a big, you know, national healing when President Obama had 2 terms? And yet, when you think about how, you know, to go through the indignity of having to produce his birth certificate, for instance.
Mm.
I don't even know if that happened in, you know, Revolutionary War times, right? Because you had to have been born. So those first presidents, you know, you would have had to have been born in the country, and there would have been far more immigrants than natural born citizens in that.
Yeah.
So just the whole thing is, you know, unfortunately it's gotten ugly, and it's gotten ugly from, you know, liberals, you know, we do get caught up in our little purity tests, which I think are not helpful. They're just
purity tests?
Yeah, you know, purity test, that idea that that someone has to be absolutely perfect in every way in order to be legit.
Okay.
I'm just thinking, who was it? The way it has worked out culturally is the year that they had no one to host the Oscars.
Okay.
Because it turned out that, was it Kevin Hart or somebody?
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, had made some, I think, homophobic or, you know, misogynist or whatever the flavor of the year was that year that he stepped over the line. So, so we can kind of take that, you know, we can take that too far.
Right.
And these are the ways that we're going to have to be flexible in the areas that we can be flexible.
Right.
So
well, that's part of healing.
Is it right that, you know, Al Franken, you know, has the picture, right? Is it right that he's out of the Senate because of that, when we have, you know, 45 who has far more serious transgressions?
Right.
And it wasn't Republicans that moved him out, removed Franken out of office.
No, didn't he do it himself?
Well, they shamed him into resigning.
I see, okay.
Right, because, well, you know, if we're going to give him hell for this, and, you know, they weren't really equivalent, but yet they were, you know, that's what I'm talking about. So, but, you know, that's in the political realm, but, you know,
yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is that at some point, you know, in life,
you
know, I think most of us have a sense of, you know, live and let live in the way that we do life. And there are things that are serious infractions.
Right.
And then there are just stupid things that people do.
Well, and that's where, if you're a healed or at least healing person, if you have done the work to heal your triggers and your trauma, then you don't have those reactions. You can have more space and compassion and understanding that people aren't perfect, that we've all done our best, made mistakes, hopefully learn from them, and that nobody is perfect. That's,
Oh, there was a guy a couple thousand years ago who said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone."
yeah,
And what are you doing talking about the mote in your neighbor's eye when you've got a log in your own, right?
exactly.
So, it's an age-old problem.
It is. It
But
is. So let's see, how are we doing on our time? Doing all right. We
so
can,
what else did I talk about yesterday anyway?
lots of good things. Let's see. I quoted you in the chat stream. Political pathogen is what you said, and I was like, ooh, that's good. A political pathogen. Do you remember? I'm looking through your notes now to see if I can find.
Yeah, it's about halfway.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that's the idea, and I made that very generalized because again, it's coming from both sides,
Mm-hmm.
right? So again, it's a consciousness thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the difference between being angry and not being hateful.
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
I made that same distinction there. Because anger is often a catalyst for change, right? We're seeing
Yeah.
that with the Black Lives Matter demonstrations and the
Right.
demonstrations against police brutality generally.
Mm-hmm.
So, but and we used to see, like from my era, it was the anti-nuke thing,
Right.
and then there was. And then the family farms were folding. So then there was Live Aid, Farm Aid, and then there was.
Right.
Remember that We Are the World? There was a famine happening.
Ethiopia.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And it was also, and they moved that into food waste, that so much gets wasted in the Western world that could be donated. On a personal level about anger and bringing about change. A friend, actually the same friend who posted the contentious America's Got Talent post, she had posted about the YouTube series Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, and Emmanuel Acho, how he's so calm and explains everything so well that it was easier to listen to what he was saying. And I said, I've had the experience where I've tried to explain a challenge I'm having calmly and rationally, and it seems like I'm heard, and then nothing changes. So again, I go back and I say, no, really, this is the situation, and be calm and rational, and nothing changes. And so it's not until I'm
That's married life.
Huh?
That's just married life.
Yes, that was what I was talking about.
Cancel.
I was talking about my ex-husband, but it wasn't until I would really lose my temper and get angry that I felt like he saw that I was really upset. That before that, it didn't seem like I couldn't be that upset because I was so calm about it. So in the same way, we don't really notice if people are peacefully protesting because they're not disturbing anything. And we can go, oh, that's interesting. Okay, and then forget about it. But when we have anger shown, then it's like, oh, they're really upset. Maybe we should pay attention. It's
numbers count.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of people being angry is a much bigger picture than one or two, certainly.
Right. Well, angry enough, not being rageful, but being angry enough to get out of the house and drive down, to be inconvenienced, to go inconvenience. Yeah.
It's amazing what power there is in inconvenience, isn't it? You mentioned it. That's something Reverend Maureen had said, that people want
Yes.
change, but they don't want to be inconvenienced.
Yeah.
And that is so true. That's one of the responses to people saying that they don't want to wear masks, is that, okay, what I'm hearing you say is that your inconvenience is more important than other people's health. It's one of those memes I posted on my Facebook page. It has the 4 things that people say and what I hear. And that's one of them.
You know, I wonder how much of that is of an ideological thing,
Mm-hmm.
and how much of it is being they left the house without their mask, and now they're really pissed off that they can't go to, they just spent 15 minutes to get here.
I think it depends on the person, but there you can, at least on Facebook, when people are arguing against it, then it's not actually about wearing the mask, it's about
I don't, to me, it's just kind of dumb,
Which part?
Just arguing on Facebook about masks, or just arguing about masks.
Right.
All you have to do is look at the numbers. And is it really, and it's only when you're inside around other people. So if you're on a walk or whatever, I walk around the neighborhood, and my mask is here. And when I approach people from about 20 feet away, I put it on. I hold my breath while I walk past them.
That's
get out of their way.
Well, and that's really the sort of idea behind it, is you're really protecting other people from you, from the potential that maybe you're infected and just don't know it. And if everybody was protecting each other from each other, if we were all that thoughtful about the people around us, it wouldn't be a problem. But some of it has been turned into a political stance where if you're wearing a mask, you're not standing up for the people who say you shouldn't. The person.
Well, and I do know that some people are making it an issue out of, to support the president. But, then just write "Vote Trump" on your mask and put your mask on.
Yeah, it seems pretty simple, but it seems like, one of these stands that people take, like, I'm going to make my stand right here, but it's like, why there?
Well, I'll tell you how jaded, I'm going to tell on myself now. So I saw a photograph of the president with a mask on, and of course that was the big deal.
Right. He's finally one of them. Yeah.
And it has the presidential seal on the side. And in my head went to, I wonder how that cost. Right? Like, is that the $3,000 toilet? Right? Is that the $2,000 mask kind of thing?
Right.
So I just had to kind of chuckle at myself, because on the one hand, I'd love him to, set the example, and then he does, and then I have to find something to pick on him about. So,
Well, he hasn't proven himself to be terribly sincere or consistent in his arguments or his information sharing about this virus. So I can't fault you for questioning him.
Really what he's doing is modeling what privilege looks like. Because everyone around him and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not even registering.
Right.
Because it's not really something he has to deal with. Because from his privileged situation, he has people around him who I'm sure are obsessing, and rightly so, obsessing about keeping him protected. I mean, he is the leader of the free world still.
Right.
So, I want him I want him to be healthy, and I would love for him to be far more effective.
Yes.
At the end of the day, like the rest of us, he's going to do what he's going to do. And which means that we need to do what we need to do.
Right.
The thing that I'm listening to, in the middle of listening to a podcast of, it's a Resmaa and D'Angelo. Is it Nancy D'Angelo? Barbara D'Angelo?
It's from On Being, isn't it?
Yes.
You have a conversation? I remember seeing that.
And it's the gal who wrote White Fragility.
Right.
And so it's a very interesting podcast. I'm about halfway through it.
Yeah, I bookmarked it. And I would like to.
It's Robin D'Angelo.
Robin.
Where was I going with
that? You were talking about, we're going to do what we need to do. And I said, which is vote. And we were talking.
Robin D'Angelo talks about, they were actually talking about people in Resmaa's liberal neighborhood who had Black Lives Matter signs up. Were concerned they were going to be targeted, and so they brought the signs indoors.
Yeah.
And so Robin was saying, well, this is what happens with white people, is that they're able to go so far, but as soon as they're targeted, and of course, Black men are targeted every day.
Yeah.
Right. Then they look for a way out. Right. And so what she is saying, what Robin D'Angelo is saying, is that for those of us with pink skins, that we need to find ways to lean into those kinds of situations rather than find a way out. Yeah. And because Resmaa was speaking to his friend, and I think this is an important point, and I think for anyone listening, this really needs to be, I think, deeply emphasized, is his white friend having the awareness about his stuff that's going on, right? And then having the realization, well, geez, my friend Resmaa, he can't take his black skin off.
Right.
Right? So in other words, we find people who we love and admire and, want to stand for, even if they're people in our past. Right? We have to bring them to the forefront.
Yeah, I'd like to assign a buddy for each white person, to have buddies of all nations, and then we'll have little tribes like that. But I don't think it'll work. You can't force people to do that. And I have heard a story from a friend, a Black friend, who said she's known somebody for 30 years and was trying to explain what her son goes through, and the woman still just couldn't see it. And she had a painful realization that she had to stop this friendship, that this person was just not going to agree or understand or be compassionate. And
that she was going to remain willfully ignorant.
Yes. And that
must be
so challenging.
So hurtful.
Yeah. Yeah. So we certainly do have our work cut out for us, and each conversation we have hopefully moves us a little closer to, incremental steps of growth, and inviting ideas of things that we can all do, and ways that we can do what's ours to do, take the steps and the actions that are tied to our own inherent gifts and interests, and lean into the discomfort, And
And to feel those deep states of consciousness that are working on keeping us separated rather than together. Because it is important to remember that we are thinking, we are thinking together, and that we are co-creating this experience of life, the great things and the ugly things together. And so if we can create, for instance, if we can create systemic racism, we can uncreate it.
yeah.
When enough of us marshal our energies and our attention that way.
So this is, you know, taking a stand. I make no secret of my connection with the divine, but give it freely for the liberation of mankind. That's a nice affirmation.
And so it is.
Amen.
Amen.
It wouldn't be a complete show without a little song from the Reds.
Yeah, you know that. Gosh, you know, I was just thinking, Homer Smith. You probably never saw that movie, Lilies of the Field.
I have seen it, but it was a while ago.
Yeah, always wanted to build it. Pardon me?
Poitier with a bunch of nuns.
Yeah, and he's up on top of the steeple, and he writes his name up there. And I thought, oh, I wonder if that's where my first interest in building things came from, was watching that movie. Right? I don't know why, but I always connected with Sidney Poitier in that movie.
Okay.
Versus, you know, where he's a doctor and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
I always liked him in To Sir with Love.
Oh, yeah.
He's a school teacher.
Yeah, with Lulu.
I mean, I just like the actor. I admired him.
He was amazing.
Yeah.
He did, wasn't he in The Heat of the Night also with Rod Steiger? Or
no, I think that was, I'm going to look it up.
Virgil.
No, I'm picturing the guy and I can't think of his name, so I'm going to quickly IMDb Heat of the Night. I've seen the commercials recently on one of the channels that shows. So it is Carol O'Connor. You're talking about the series, right? Howard E. Rollins Jr. Oh,
that's a new version.
This is the guy who was in the series with Carol O'Connor.
No, this is an old movie. I keep forgetting that I'm, you know, a bit older than you are.
Oh yeah, Sidney Poitier, Rod Steiger.
Yeah.
Okay, I was talking about the TV series.
Yeah, and you know, Steiger plays this great redneck small town sheriff.
Okay.
And Poitier just pushes right back. He's a detective from the north. I forget what case they're working on.
Yeah.
But they grow to respect each other, you know, through the film. I don't know that they ever wanted to hang out with each other, but, you know.
Now that was in
I don't know that he said, hey, Cracker, if you're ever up in New York, come look me up. I don't think it was kind of one of those.
Maybe that got edited out of the movie.
But
the movie was 1967. The TV series was 1988 to 1995.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it was Carol O'Connor trying to either depart from or build on his Archie Bunker character, who was, you know, definitely racist.
Oh, yeah. And so I remember that show because I used to come home from Boy Scouts and it would be on, and so I would watch it with my mom and I'd sit there.
Yeah, it was shocking. In that show, by just letting him be so unconsciously racist. Of course, everybody fell under his whip. Right.
Yeah. So Archie Bunker.
Equal opportunity about it.
Yeah.
He was mad at everybody.
Anyway.
But we're not. We love everybody. That's how we're going to end this episode.
Yes.
So we have the nice slide, which I will try to show again and share the screen. Take away, making no secret of our connection with the divine and giving it freely for all of mankind and womankind and people kind, all the kinds.
It's no secret.
See, another song from Reverend Mike.
Oh, how'd you like that U2 song that Ken did?
Very cool. Yeah.
Did a good job with that.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen the Sunday Talk for July 12th, you can go back and watch it on the CSLGH YouTube channel.
At least watch it for the music.
Yeah, and the talk. Talk was good too, and Reverend Nancy's.
Reverend Nancy had a great opening.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So if you haven't seen it, or if you have and you want to watch it again, go back and watch that. And you can watch our previous episodes, our conversations with Reverend Nancy and Salam Thompson around the Black Lives Matter movement, and just trying to create those conversations and learn what we don't know and what we haven't paid attention to.
Educate yourself.
Yeah. And come back next week when we have more thoughts on more talks.
Yeah.
Toodaloo.
Bye.